Hello and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. I'm your host, Brian Phillips. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And on occasion, I know we like to talk about current events and the hubbub and everything going on in the news, but occasionally we like to slow it down just a little bit and really dive deep into specific issues, particularly the major issues that drive Texas. So this is going to be an episode of The Right Idea in depth. And so today, our guest, we have a very special guest we're going to go in depth with, is someone who's on the forefront of one of Texas's most vital industries. Our guest is Texas Railroad Commissioner Wayne Christian. Very happy to have you here. Very excited to get into this conversation with you. Wayne is a seasoned leader with a wealth of experience in energy regulation and public service. For over 2 decades, Commissioner Christian has been working to ensure that Texas remains a leader in energy production while balancing the needs of consumers, businesses, and the environment. He's been a staunch advocate for reliable, affordable energy, protecting the interests of both Texans and the state's economy. Commissioner Christian, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Brian, it's an honor to be here. And I love the way you started the introduction there. Automatically said, we're going to slow down and dumb down the program again today because this guy here isn't exactly the smartest guy in town. No, that's just what you wanted.
It's not just throwing headlines at you all the time. That's what Derek and I get on here, and we try to be funny, but we mostly go too fast through the issues.
And my wife reminds me I'm not a comedian.
Oh, well, we'll find out. We'll find out because we're definitely Derek is usually the funny one of the two of us. So, but I did want to plug. I love shameless plugs. In addition to our newsletter, The Post, which you can subscribe at texaspolicy.com/The Post. It always has exclusive information. It's always got a kind of a recap of what we're doing as well as some fun Texas things. But in addition to our shameless plug, I will shamelessly plug Wayne's World, Energizing Texas. You are also a podcaster,
right?
And you can find those episodes in your podcast on Spotify. How long have you been doing that?
Do you know I had, as far as I can tell, I had the first podcast in Austin, Texas by a political person. I remember, and it's one way I got kicked out of the legislature by the Speaker of the House. Literally, it was back during the session. I was president of the Conservative Coalition. And of course, we were fighting the conservatives back when, anyhow, so we were got very strong in the Texas legislature. I had the second largest caucus above the Democrat caucus. Only the Republican caucus was larger. And so we started having too much influence. When you got too much influence, they don't like you. So I said, well, as the Conservative Coalition, let's do it wasn't a podcast at the time, it was just a YouTube.
Sure, yeah.
And I would interview people in the Capitol. We'd talk about different bills. We'd talk about different things. Governor Perry I interviewed during the session, whatever. So I literally had it's still on YouTube now in the history. But I had the first one. If I'd have kept doing that, I might have been able to make money at the deal. Because
now look at Joe Rogan. Got 100 million people watching him. He's making millions and millions of dollars. Lots of guys. Well, I love the Wayne's World. Being on the back end of Gen X, I definitely. So we'll have to see if you can do your version of Bohemian Rhapsody later.
We'll do a lot of that.
Yes. All right. Well, let's jump into it. We do need to talk a little bit about current events, and of course, 2 weeks ago today, just blew everybody's mind. This landslide victory by President Trump. What were your thoughts on the election and kind of how things went? But also, what kind of changes do you think you're going to see from the Trump administration, whether it's energy related or otherwise? What are you really looking at? What are you most excited about? And maybe even what are some of your concerns?
Well, the overall thing I think a lot of people is we no longer have to be ashamed or in our closets to admit we're God-fearing, conservative, pro-American people. And I think Governor Huckabee was at an event here in Austin about a month ago, and he said, evil used to have...
which one? There's two.
Oh, that's right.
You got to be careful now.
Mike, the daddy, the least important. That's what he said. He introduced, I'm the least important Huckabee now.
That's right.
But he said real quickly, it used to be evil. They said, this is evil versus good. It's beyond Republican, Democrat. And a lot of the issues we look at is when bad things are in control, bad things happen. And he said, it used to be kind of hidden, but said when you've got a bus pulled up to a major convention headquarters that's performing free abortions, when you've got a major issue for a party to go in and take children who can't be given an aspirin at public school and have sex changes done to them without parental choice, when you've got teachers trying to put little boys in bathrooms with little girls, said this is way beyond. And I think it's really a time that I'm very thankful. I think our Republican Party in Texas, faith, family, freedom, and I think we may be seeing a move back prayerfully to that right now. So that's my excitement, is to see us move back to common sense, economically, morally. You can't separate them and have good government, a successful nation.
And there's definitely been a lot of discussion, maybe not as much soul searching as there needs to be on the left, but a lot of discussion about what they did wrong and about how far and how radical the left has gone over the last 4 or 5 years. But also the Trump campaign, and frankly, when people think about what their life was like during the first Trump administration, they think fondly of that. They think that those were good times, and that's something that they want to get back to. So there was also an element of the Trump campaign, which is like, hey, this is what we're for. And so it wasn't just the radical policies, but also the things that we're for. So what are you looking forward to most, maybe in energy or other issues, about getting back to?
Well, of course, what I'm looking forward to is drill, baby, drill. And it's great because we need to as a nation. I mean, every country that has oil is richer than every country that doesn't have oil. Every country that's richer is cleaner than every country that's poorer. That means if you want to clean up a country, I mean, the facts, the logic is, the history is, discover oil, develop oil. It cleans up the country because they're richer. They can do things that other countries cannot do. So it's exciting to see that. It's exciting to see Texas and to look historically at what we've done with oil. Back World War I, we were the oil that the European countries in the American Petroleum Museum say it was a wave of oil from Texas, was Pioneer Field up in Eastland County, and that provided the majority of oil. World War II, Winston Churchill says it was a sea of oil from East Texas that won World War II, and that was the Big Inch Little Inch pipeline out of Kilgore, Texas, that won World War II. And we're sitting here, I believe, with a new international war that's brewing here. And if not by military, it's definitely these United Nations, World Economic Forum, other organizations internationally that are trying to take the power away from the United States. And I see this is a chance for us to stand up, develop the oil that God gave us and the gas and the other minerals in the ground, and retain and become that energy dominant place on planet Earth that can stand up and can advocate for those beneficial democratic views that the world has just lost.
And you make a great point about, it's the rich countries that can develop the kinds of technology that make energy use much more efficient as well as cleaner. So we're using less and it's better for the environment.
Let's take what Joe Biden had to say. The second address he did to the nation after his first State of the Union, Joe Biden was addressing the nation. He says the United States is 15% of the world environment. The rest of the world is 85%. If we do everything right, it will make no difference. Now, this is Joe Biden stating that to the nation in his second address, but it's true. And he admitted it and said, but what's weird, he goes on to say that they're going to stop oil and gas in America to make sure and clean the environment.
With I guess this magical leverage, this magical leverage we have over China.
So So his viewpoint and the Green New Deal and the Inflation Reduction Act and all of these moves by Congress and by the president are made to make sure that the United States is less powerful in oil and gas, and we do have oil and gas. So that means only the dirty countries are left to provide it.
I want to jump into that. Was actually my next question is this idea that in so many areas, whether it's immigration or education or healthcare, for the last 4 years, we haven't had a partner. Conservatives in particular, particularly conservative states like Texas, have not had a partner in the White House, to work with on solving some of these big issues. In fact, particularly in places like energy and immigration, you've had someone not just not doing their job and not doing the right thing for the American people, but actually undermining policies that we're trying to implement here, to grow prosperity, to keep the border safe and all of that. What's that going to be like? From your perch and where you sit on the commission, what's that going to be like to finally have, not only not somebody whacking at you all the time, but actually being a partner in developing the right policies and implementing the right things? It's
going to be a lot easier because we've been having to get Ken Paxton to file lawsuits against every time the EPA would make a ruling or the Department of Interior would make a ruling. We'd call Ken, I'd yell at him and say, Ken, we're not a lawsuit to file, and he's been very good at doing it, by the way. Stood up for us tremendously. But that's been the game we've been playing. Frankly, we enjoyed some of the best oil prices and gas prices and all for the industry in Texas in history during this time, and that's when supply is down, then the demand goes up, and you wind up prices going up. It's just a world of supply and demand.
Yep.
What I foresee in Texas right now, we were, and I think it was the Wall Street Journal or one of the major Forbes said the state of Texas is the hope to the free world. because of our LNG exports. When the world was shutting down on oil and gas, Texas was the number one producer in the world of LNG, in the free world. Let's say in the free world, okay? And we were the hope for the free world. That's what happened during these last few years with Joe Biden, Barack Obama, and all this crew there. Texas was 40% of the oil production. We were 30% plus of the natural gas production of the entire United States. If we were a nation, we would be number 4 in the world in oil and gas production. And so I think we in Texas don't understand the way we saved the free world during this time. Well, now the problem I see from the Texas aspect is if and I'm thank God we're going to drill, baby, drill, but that's going to open up all these federal lands. It's going to open up Alaska, all these other fields that have been pulled back, Colorado shut down because of the Biden administration will be opened up. Well, I don't want them getting any benefits that Texas doesn't get because we were good during the hard times.
Right.
I don't want us to get discriminated against during the good times. And so I think it's going to be very important for us as elected officials, as congressmen, as legislators, to make sure that not that we've got our hand out and won't be a part of any government giveaway, but make sure the programs are fair to the state of Texas as they open up nationwide.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point. I mean, about the not necessarily a dichotomy, but that idea that, look, people around Texas, they don't want high gas prices. But I mean, to your point, if gas prices are high, then the price of oil is high, and then Texas does better, and we put more money in the education fund and all those kind of things.
Right.
From like how do you balance that? I mean, how do you especially as the chief regulators of the oil and gas industry, how do you, what's your approach, in order to make sure that consumers are protected, but also that the oil and gas industry is not, faltering?
Well, I've spent about 60 of my years, 65 years, as young as I am, in financial services and banking. And what you do is let the free market operate. And that's important because you don't want the government, and this is where the problems always occur, when government gets involved, and they always do. Okay, so that's how you fix the problem. You let the free market set the price like it's supposed to. What goes screwy is when you have something like the carbon tax or the carbon credits and all that the government's coming out with in the Inflation Reduction Act, and they start giving dollars to companies to do things that are not profitable, using our tax dollars to do it, competing against oil and gas in a free market. So anytime you add something has to be done, who's going to pay for it? Either the taxpayer or the consumer. When you tax big corporations, as the Democrats wanted to do, do you think those board of directors are going to sit there and pay those bills? They're going to clink their glasses, increase the price of any product we got.
That's right.
And so the money is always going to go down to the consumer or the taxpayer. And so what you need is the free market. Get out of the way, government. Just make sure government stays there to make sure there's not corruption or lack of competition.
Yeah, we're one of my favorite cartoons is of a guy staring at his electric bill, and he's complaining that his electric bill is high, while also the the subsidies are coming out of his wallet going to the big windmills, as well. So it's coming out of both ends. That's literally, right. It's paying on the front end, paying on the back end as well. One of the things that's really important, that I know that the commission focuses on, and actually, why don't you just describe a little bit before we kind of jump into it, just so I'm sure our audience is well aware, but just give your elevator speech on kind of what the commission is and what you guys do on a day-to-day basis.
Well, I think it's important to know what it's not. We have nothing to do with railroads, okay? The Railroad Commission of Texas has nothing to do with railroads. And it's oil, gas, and coal and all the minerals good Lord gave us in the ground. And our job is to defend those, to protect those, and to make sure they operate to the full credit and extent of the voters or the citizens of the state who own those minerals. And our job is from the time they're in the ground, allowing them to be drilled or dug for or whatever's taken to get them out of the ground and then transport them to the refinery or the end user, the electric generating facility, whatever. So ours is the raw material in the ground all the way to the place that they turn it into a refinery, into a product for the consumer. That's our job.
Now, about 3 years ago, we did, maybe more about 4 or 5 years ago, TPPF did some focus grouping, and we were asking people about energy and kind of trying to understand where people's general education is about, how we make energy and all those kinds of things. And I'm not kidding. We had 2 focus groups that had about 15 or 20 people each, and we asked the question, where does energy come from? And we had at least 2 or 3 people in each focus group that said something along the lines of the wall. or the outlet, or or something like from my kitchen, or like that. Some people just have no understanding of how we get that stuff out of the ground, and then and it makes my microwave turn on. So how much time do you guys feel like you have to spend educating the public, and then what kind of efforts are you engaged in to make sure that people understand that that it doesn't come from the wall?
Right. Well, that's one of the great challenges I found when I came to the commission about 6 or 7 years ago, and I found that people didn't know what it did. People to this day, I'm going to Kilgore, Texas tomorrow, the place that the big inch, little inch pipeline saved World War II. And I guarantee you, I will talk to that audience at the Lions Club, and I guarantee you there'll be 2 or 3 in the room that have no clue of what the Railroad Commission does. And that's scary because people are uninformed. It's not transparent. People don't know where it comes from. And a big part of it, that's the fight I've been having since I got here. I had our logo changed. The lapel pin I have here had oil, gas, and coal added to the lapel badge for the reason to let people know what the pump we do.
Yeah.
Because when voters don't know what it is in a democracy, when we're sitting here having a democratic election in this place called Texas, they don't know what the Railroad Commissioner does, and everybody thinks he runs the railroads. And it makes it easy for the anti-oil and gas folks, which are very evident in the green groups around the country now, and in Texas, groups that are organized in Texas to shut down oil and gas. Well, how easy for them then to run a candidate, put a bunch of George Soros dollars, who has given money in the campaigns against us and others, and all of a sudden they win a seat on the Railroad Commission and shut down oil and gas in Texas. And that's a fear I have that's going on because people don't understand the system of oil and gas and what it does.
Now, you mentioned a couple of times, I was going to ask you at the end kind of tongue-in-cheek, but you brought it up a couple of times. Have you ever considered changing the name, and what would that take if you had?
Number one, that's up to the legislature.
Okay.
So they do that. What I think, and for a while I didn't because it's historical. We like what it is. I respect that. Fair. But when I see the danger that's occurring right now in the current elections, the dollars it's going to take, and elections are great because it's the democratic system we've learned to, but they can get corrupt pretty fast when a big dollar starts controlling, and when people are not aware. And I think it's time that we considered changing the name of the Railroad Commission of Texas and change it to Reliable Energy Commission,
Commission of Prosperity and Freedom, or something. I like
Energy Committee, something like it. But that way, it's not hidden from the voters, and I think it's never good when the people who supposedly run the state have no clue what they're voting for, what they're doing, and I think that's what it's come to.
And the members get, and it's every 2 years, right? The members vote. It's a statewide. It's one of the big 6 or 7 statewide offices that gets voted on. And unlike the governor and Senate governor, we vote on one of the commissioners every 2 years. And so you're right. It's right there, top of mind, and people need to know what it is. Now, you've interchangeably used the Green New Deal and the Inflation Reduction Act. I think it's important for our audience to know those are the same things. I mean, remember, when AOC and Bernie Sanders and all of them were out there with this crazy $6 trillion or whatever, $16 trillion plan for the Green New Deal, and everybody was making fun of it, and we're acting like this is just a pipe dream. The reality is a lot of that ended up in the Inflation Reduction Act. So talk to us a little bit about that and how, for lack of a better term, how screwed are we that a lot of that ended up in that bill that ultimately passed.
Right. Well, what happened, you're exactly right. It's the Green New Deal with inside, let's just say, Al Gore, who was one of the original founders of the Green movement back a jillion years ago, and has been yelling he invented the internet and all the things that he did with his movie and all that. Everything in the movie was found to be incorrect, by the way, since that time. But he's still ranting out there. He said, in 40 years we've been fighting this. Finally, we have won. This Inflation Reduction Act in Texas is the answer we've all been working for. I knew we were in trouble when I heard that out of Al Gore, and indeed it is. I think originally it projected $2 trillion in Texas would be fighting. It's now up to $3 trillion. And let me give you a quick example. One of these things is carbon capture, and CO2 is dangerous. If you'll just Google on Al Gore's internet, and I use that as a joke because he claimed he invented it. If you look, it's like 0.004% of the whole environment is carbon dioxide. And then you ask, okay, second question to ask the internet, how much of that is man-made? And it's like 3%, something like that. And so you start calculating, it's like 0.0000 of the environment. And this is my East Texas analogy to how much difference CO2 capture and taking it all away would do in the state of Texas. After our president already said we're only 15% of the environment, it'd make no difference what we did. When you start talking about the amount of carbon dioxide in the environment that man can change, it's like a grasshopper passing gas in a hurricane. Now, that's an old East Texas analogy, but it is exactly true.
Still family friendly.
It is family. Yeah, if I said the wrong word, it'd be kind of weird. But passing gas, I thought would work.
There you go.
And then it's not scientific because who knows what grasshoppers really do? You just don't know. But seriously, it's that crazy. And then they're on the methane now, which is natural gas, and they're saying that's the big danger. You start looking at how much of the atmosphere methane is, it's less than carbon dioxide. And people need to know, why did carbon dioxide get to be the threat to the environment now? Well, they started years ago, if you remember.
Right, they call it a pollutant. Like every time you exhale, you're polluting.
But it wasn't scientists, universities, or politicians that decided this. It was the Supreme Court of the United States. Back when it was under a more liberal majority, they voted by one vote majority, and I forget, the Justice Scalia did the dissenting opinion, and he said, it is impossible that you can take a natural chemical of the atmosphere and say it's a threat to mankind caused by mankind. And so you have Scalia that was against it, and it passed by one vote in the Supreme Court. So it was never carbon dioxide declared by scientists or fact or history. It was a legal decision by a liberal court.
And I think as you dive into these issues, in fact, you don't really need to dive that far to start realizing that a lot of the things that they're saying, the science doesn't add up, the math never adds up. One of those components is how much, the sort of the green or the transition, right? The energy transition is what they call it, how we're going to be transitioning away from oil and gas and coal and be using these renewables. And yet when you start looking at the math, like what it would take.
It ain't going to happen.
What it would take to the amount of land and the amount of minerals and all of that. Can you talk a little bit about, to replace oil and gas, even in just a state like Texas, what that would take?
Well, let me finish the Inflation Reduction Act, where it is like this carbon. Let me give you an example. You say, well, how's that going to affect us in Texas? Okay. Already has, big time. We had a company that me and Rick Perry, who was Energy Secretary, and Governor Abbott cut a ribbon for about 6 years ago down in Houston called Petronova. It was the world's largest carbon capture sequestration plant, okay? And what it did, it captured carbon in the air, stuck it in the ground, shot it out below oil and gas fields, and it was supposed to increase their production by pressure underneath. Logical, right?
Okay, sure. Sounds
Went bankrupt in 2 years. Guess what's reopening? Petronova. How are they reopening after bankruptcy? They can't make any money. My grandkids' money. The taxpayer is paying for it in the Inflation Reduction Act. That's what they're doing with that money in the Inflation Reduction Act. It's a losing proposition that has no agreed scientific basis. In fact, I got a letter from 1,600 scientists worldwide this past year, 2023, that says there is no environmental crisis. It's all a scam and hoax, including 4 Nobel laureates, one of which is a doctor from up in Canada, I think it's Dr. Moore, and he was a founder of Greenpeace and says this is all
Patrick
just
Moore,
a scam.
sure,
This is all just a scam. And yet we're sitting here so say at best, you can say, we're not saying, well, it's true or false, CO2 is a threat to the environment. At best, it's unsettled. We're going to spend $3 trillion of our taxpayer dollars at a time we're already in terrible debt as Americans on this problem when it's not even a settled problem, and think that's what's going on in Texas.
Yeah, and I think to be clear, what we're saying when we say that is the climate alarmism is totally unfounded.
Yes.
That there are climate scientists who say, look, the climate is changing here and there, and that whether it's man-made or otherwise, it's having these certain effects, and we're studying it, and it's moving, and we're trying to figure it out and see how that's going to, what that's going to mean for humankind in 100 years.
Let me take another step for you. Okay, how's it affecting us in Texas? That's Texas. Okay, there we're opening up this plant that didn't. Now they've got a major oil company that's opened up a big carbon capture plant out in West Texas using our taxpayer dollars to do that one, okay? Same routine that doesn't work, isn't proven, the science is unsettled whether it's even needed to be done or not. And then you're sitting here, article Wall Street Journal this past month said that several of our oil company presidents met with Donald Trump at a fundraiser in Houston, Texas less than a month ago and asked him specifically to not do away with the Inflation Reduction Act because we in Texas were making too much money on it. This is Wall Street Journal. People can look this one up. But this means that our industry, oil and gas, is helping with the movement to shut down oil and gas. Now, give me the oxymoron on that sucker. And that's why I, as a railroad commissioner who's supposed to be defending for the citizens of Texas their oil and gas, am sitting here, who's playing this game on our side now, and follow the money.
Well, let's jump into let's just we talk about the politics and policy of all this. 3 years ago, Winter Storm Uri. Let's talk about that a little bit, because obviously that's still very fresh in the minds of Texans. In fact, to this day, we continue to poll on this issue to ask people in Texas if they feel like our legislative leaders in particular have done enough to fix the grid, whatever that means, fix the system, whatever that means, to ensure that something like that doesn't happen again. You obviously have paid a lot of attention to this pretty closely, and I know electricity is more in the purview of the PUC, but it's one of those issues. I mean, obviously natural gas was a big part of that. Where do you stand in terms of how much you think Texas has done? Are you comfortable? Are you happy with kind of the way things have progressed, or what's your take on that since 2001? 2021, sorry.
In a nutshell, our policy is insane in Texas. Has been absolutely insane. Let me give you the point. We sat there during Storm Uri. I was 5 days by myself, frozen in a house that we had, and I learned that you don't like to do without electricity. Well, natural gas produced about 85% of the folks that use natural gas found it was there and got power from it. Coal was also there and available when it was needed and used. Wind and solar went to, I think, 6% and 3% or something like that of supply needed. Natural gas was 85%. We proved, I did a Wall Street Journal article published it a month after Storm Uri that I had. And it said, and basically my saying there was, we have spent so much money on unreliable energy in Texas, we let the pilot light go out on reliable energy. We had spent at that time, the past 20 years, $20 billion of federal and state tax dollars on begging China to send us windmills and solar panels and batteries over a 20-year period, sticking them up and getting tax rebates all over the state of Texas. So we had spent a lot of money, a lot of effort. In fact, Texas was number one in wind energy at the time. And you say, well, what's happened since then? I just got through today approving the reconstruction efforts where we're reclaiming the land as it was on lignite plants all over the state of Texas, where we were producing cheap, plentiful, reliable, and clean energy. Reliable. Mm-hmm. This is reliable energy. So we've shut down coal and lignite. To a large extent, the market did that because natural gas, we found so much of it, the price is cheaper, and so it's higher price to do it from coal. But still, we have retired lignite since Storm Uri. That's dependable energy. And with natural gas, we have not built, I don't think, one new generating plant that I know of on natural gas, and I think there's been some retired.
So even since then, we're still shutting down the ones that produce the energy, and we're still subsidizing the stuff that doesn't.
We're sitting here having increased the population in Texas by at least 1,000 people a day legally, okay, since that storm. That's increasing demand. Supply, we've retired several lignite generating facilities. We've built virtually no new natural gas, no nuclear at all. Mm-hmm. So in the time you asked me how we've done, is the policy in Texas been smart? It is insane. We have increased demand, decreased supply of the product we need to produce electricity. And we're wondering why we're now hearing rolling blackouts, and we didn't 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. You didn't hear potential rolling blackouts in this state, and now you're hearing it every other day projected by ERCOT or others. So have the legislature done a good job? Last year they did a good job on setting some money aside for natural gas and whatever, but you're sitting here, was it 5 years from that storm? Mm-hmm. And we have less reliable energy in Texas for electricity than we did when Uri came.
So I'll put you back in the legislature, give you a magic wand, and I know there's not going to be one bill that fixes everything, but what should be at least the philosophical or the substantive approach to getting Texas in a place where we can all be super confident and that the lights are going to come on?
Well, there's a lot of work to be done there, of course, but the main thing is get reliable energy. And that's going to be natural gas, number one. Nuclear is probably another one we need to allow and encourage that. And I think they've turned the corner, but it's going to take 5 or 6 years if you started building it today.
That's right. And the permitting process, especially for something like nuclear, takes forever.
Yeah, but you ask me, what has happened since Uri, that 5-year period, I think we've sat on our rear ends in Texas and allowed the greenies to control. And from this going forward, I hope we've turned the corner. There are good people over there in the Texas Capitol and good congressmen that are helping and working with us every day. But we've had to push from the Railroad Commission to shut down some of this crazy methane rules, other rules that are trying to shut down oil and gas in Texas. When you've got company presidents working right now to expand the Inflation Reduction Act to keep shutting down oil and gas, that doesn't bode well for more electricity in Texas.
to follow up just what you were talking about, tell me about what the Texas Reliable Energy Caucus is.
We have organized the Texas did not have an oil and gas caucus. And I'm thinking if we were a nation, we'd be number 4 in the world in oil and gas production. And so oil and gas are like all the rainy day fund, all the permanent school fund, all the higher education fund. It's 40% of our economy in the state of Texas is direct or indirect oil and gas. And we're sitting here with, say, just the methane rule that the EPA have just finalized this month. It will kill over 10,000 wells in the state of Texas and shut down hundreds of independent producers. But that's the current law. Now, hopefully under Donald Trump, we can turn that sucker around, and we've asked Ken Paxton, but that's what we're existing under here. So under threat is 40% of Texas. It's what makes Texas, Texas. Okay?
Right.
It's what makes us different is oil and gas, what the good Lord's given us in the ground. But we're going to shut that down and think it's not going to affect us at our school and everywhere else. It will destroy Texas as Texas, and we'll be back, as some of the poorer states are, begging on Washington to, yes, sir, please send us money. Whereas in Texas, we've been able to snub the feds because God gave us oil and gas, okay? And so that's what I see under threat right now. I'm lost the question. I'm beginning to...
Well, no, I was just asking about the Texas Reliable Energy Caucus. Is that what you were looking to do something about that in the legislature?
So this is a way we need... The problem in the Texas legislature is why we have a lot of good people, good governor, good lieutenant governor, all great, but we only meet once every 2 years. And it's very limited how many bills you can get through. Well, my friend,
tell me about it.
The Railroad Commission.
That's all we worry about.
News.
Yeah,
that's good news that we can get a lot of bills through, right?
Sometimes it's good. Sometimes, we've been working on school choice for about 40 years.
I know, but
we're getting there.
But that's one bill, so that's limited. You get one through, you're happy. Okay?
All right.
Okay. But the trouble is, these rules we're under attack is every day coming, whether it be a lizard or some type of endangered species, whether it be a methane rule, a flaring rule, some type of rule coming at EPA. And their goal, y'all, is not to clean the environment. Their goal is to shut down oil and gas. And we're sitting here seeing those come every other month, a rule, some trying to hurt oil and gas. Well, the legislature can't fight that 12 months a year because they only meet once every 2 years. And then it takes 6 months to get that in effect after that. And so just the system. So I've come up with the idea of letting the Railroad Commission of Texas coordinate, okay, and be the coordinating board and have all of our congressmen as members for the United States Congress and our legislators, senators and representatives, as members of the caucus. That way we have the Texas Reliable Energy Caucus. And our job is to be able to help our congressmen, and our congressmen be able to talk to our state legislators and say, when y'all get in session, we need this to match with what we're doing so that it helps the state of Texas. Same way our state legislators can have communication saying, man, this is a problem in my district, but I can't do anything for 2 years. Call up the congressional delegation and say, can y'all help us out now since we're not in session? And when we come to a session, we can already have all of our legislators acquainted with the oil and gas issues we're going to go into the session with, rather than waiting to the top 10 issues by the Texas Public Policy Foundation or the governor or the lieutenant governor. By the way, none of those top 10 issues with oil and gas under attack that we're talking today, let me just tell you this. It concerns me that oil and gas under attack is not even a top 10 issue of Public Policy Foundation or any of the issues coming out, including the legislative priorities of the Republican Party of Texas.
That is a fair criticism, and that is accurate. But obviously, it's one of those things that hits so many different issues. And one of the things that we do work on that Texas has been a leader on, as well as yourself, is one of the other threats is ESG, is environmental social governance. Can you talk a little bit about how that threatens oil and gas industry and therefore the prosperity of Texas?
About 6 years ago, when I first got to be railroad commissioner, I was asked by Energy Transfer, one of our major companies, to go up to Dallas and meet with their board of directors. And at that board, their gentleman that was their representative on Wall Street, their investment guy, he was there and he said, I just want to tell you something, Commissioner, that's arrived. Said Al Gore and Larry Fink have introduced what they call ESG play on Wall Street. And they're using, at the time, that was the time the Permian Basin had just come in about 2018. And so flaring was rampant. When you first discover oil, you either burn it or it goes in the atmosphere as a pollutant. Flaring is an environmental tool. Right. It keeps gas from going there. But we were flaring a lot of gas out in the Permian Basin, and they were using, Larry Fink and them, they were using, and Al Gore were using photos of flaring on Wall Street to sell their environmental, social, and governance
Like
funds.
that was the part polluting it.
Yes, we were polluting like crazy in
right.
Texas and all this. And so we went to work at the Railroad Commission, of course, then trying to regulate and trying to ask the industry to start decreasing. And flaring in Texas went at the time, and it was 2.8% at that time, went down during COVID to about 1.8%, and it's now down to less than 1%. There's months we have like 1% of all the gas being produced in Texas is being flared. Mm-hmm. And so, separate topic, but why are we making policy to the trillions of dollars on oil and gas over an industry that's doing less than 1%? Mm-hmm. Why is that even a problem? In no other industry would it be, but we are looking at shutting down oil and gas because it's producing less than 1% of this, what they call a pollutant. Right. But anyhow, back to.
But that's one of the things that they use with ESG, which is to, there's all these policies that they make up that essentially they're trying to use their leverage as stockholders and all of that to try and force companies to either change their business practices or to get out of the business altogether. And that, of course, is a huge threat to our prosperity here in Texas.
At the time I was on the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission, Governor Abbott had appointed me to. And so I go there in the next month and I say, okay, guys, we need to fight these ESG funds that are coming in. And I did a resolution. I carried a resolution. We prepared a resolution, entered it to the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission, and they wouldn't pass it because they didn't know what I was talking about. They had no clue what an ESG was. Funny story, though. I was the first vice president, and Governor Burgum was the president of the IOGCC. So Burgum calls me up. He says, Christian, can I carry your resolution back to the so he came in and carried it back and passed my resolution on ESG before anybody knew what the heck a resolution ESG was. Mm-hmm. So at that point, Governor Burgum passed it, and I'm glad he's got a nice position now, so I'll have a working relationship, hopefully, of some extent with him. But he carried that resolution for me, and we passed it at the time. So we were the first resolution I know of in the United States anti-ESG, and it came after I'd heard the problem at Energy Transfer in Texas.
Yeah, and they stole our idea in Florida and then tried to take credit for it. So,
yes,
but we love DeSantis and all his folks out there, where they're all good friends. You mentioned Governor Burgum, who has been nominated to be the Interior Secretary. We got an announcement over the last 48 hours or so that Chris Wright is going to be the Energy Secretary. He's got connections, obviously, here in Texas. What do you know of Chris Wright, and what's your first thoughts on him as being our new Energy
just
Secretary?
Tremendous. What they're putting together is I think of it as an energy team. I'm sure there's a bigger name for it, but you've got Wright.
Elon Musk calls them the Avengers, so I don't know if Chris Wright's going to be part of that or not. But
I think it's super. We have those people that work together. They see how the parts do. I was thinking Burgum would have wound up energy director, but they said the Department of Interior is more of a coordinating mechanism for putting the Department of Energy and all this into work. So it's going to be a team effort, I think. And Wright being there for EPA couldn't be better. I mean, what a friend, what a hero, and the stuff we've been talking about today, and I'm sure you may have done podcasts with him in the past. He is an expert that has the details. I talk about I'm never the smartest guy in the room and understand it, He is one of the smartest guys in the room.
That's what we hear, yeah.
He's one of the smartest guys in the room. He knows
and of course, he'll be at Energy. Congressman Lee Zeldin will be at EPA. That's another great pick. And I think there's some unwritten rule, which is you have to be from a Western state in order to be the Department of Interior.
You see why I'm saying the problem I have at the Railroad Commission is to make sure we get our parts in Texas,
right, Yeah.
But, we seem to get left out on some of this stuff.
Yeah, Texas never considered, although we're usually putting people in the White House. So,
right.
We have a little higher aspirations than Secretary of Interior. Couple minutes left in the podcast, and this has been fantastic. So thank you for all of your knowledge and stories and having fun with this very serious and important issues. I do want to switch to water because I don't think a lot of people know, in addition to all the other things they may not know about the Railroad Commission, that water is a big issue as well. Our CEO, Greg Sindelar, went on a rural tour kind of under the radar. We didn't publicize or anything, but he went out and met over the interim with a lot of rural communities. And in addition to things like, hey, we need more money for education or we need more money for that, water obviously is a very big issue. And this is one of the things that you guys look at to make sure that that as water is being used in the industry, it's not contaminating or being contaminated. And so talk a little bit about how you guys, do some environmental stewardship when it comes to water.
Right. It's one of the most important issues we have. Frankly, I think one thing is the misrepresentation of the oil and gas industry as being one of the major polluters. Water is used in the amount of water the oil and gas industry statewide uses is about, I think, 5 to 6% Okay, so we are not the major user of water in Texas, and yet almost every article you see in the paper talks about water going around with the oil and gas industry needs to change this. So it's really kind of a misrepresentation of the press on this. I know everybody loves the press, never would they ever say, but that's it. But that doesn't make it unimportant. And so another issue that we've seen right now are what they're calling these wells that are coming up all over West Texas and the lake that got polluted that Texas Monthly went on, all this kind of stuff, was the Railroad Commission. And what the story back there is, we at the Railroad Commission are not regulators of water. Okay. Now, if there is a water well that an oil and gas company owns on that, yes, we regulate and take care of that and make sure that. But the water out there back about 100 years ago when they started drilling these oil wells out in West Texas and East Texas, well, the oil companies would strike water. So it'd be a dry hole for oil, but they'd strike water. Instead of covering them back up, the landowner wanted the water, of course, out there in West Texas. So the state legislature came up with a law. The oil companies, if they deed the water well over to the individual landowner, they no longer have liability for it. It was never an oil well; it was a water well.
Right.
Well, 100 years later, these water wells are starting to bust or get polluted or come up with salt water. Lake Beamer was one. It was getting salt water, and everybody went back. Well, it was drilled by this oil company back 70 years ago. That's good, but the legislature and all had taken the liability to the landowner. These are never were oil wells in those situations, and those are hundreds of them all over West Texas, East Texas, and all. And the legislature last session clarified and made sure TCEQ is over water wells in Texas. So that was just an immediate problem there. But yes, we also have a second problem having, the 1 million acre fire that came, and the reason for the fire basically that I've been carried over there by different folks in the Panhandle is that these old light poles or creosote poles have been there 70 years, and they're starting to electric wires break over, hit that sagebrush, and boom, you had a 1 million acre fire.
Yeah.
Well, the same thing's happening on these old casings for these old oil wells. We just had one blowout in West Texas, cost us $10 million at the Railroad Commission, to get that thing under control. And what it amounts to is this was a couple, not an oil company, back in 1949 that drilled their own oil well on their property. And, of course, when it busted a loop, back then there was no regulation on it. That's right. So Ma and Pa just dug them an oil well out on their property. And this happened.
Too many Beverly Hillbillies episodes.
That's right. But this happened all over West Texas and East Texas in that day. And even if it were good stuff, you're starting to have the structures, just like the poles are starting to rot after 70 years. Stuff breaks after a certain number of years. And this is a threat the Railroad Commission is looking at right now, asking for extra funds during this session to be there for emergency issues from these old casings, these old things with no bad intent. It was just old stuff, and it's getting old and breaking. Everybody that has a house knows that, when you first build a new house, it's all pretty and wonderful, but about 15 years later, when the roof goes out, you put money on that roof, it doesn't improve the value, it's just maintenance.
Now, when I first bought a house, somebody told me, well, now pretty much for the rest of your life, all you're going to be doing is working on that house.
That's
so
right.
It doesn't take 15 years to have to replace something. I do want to say, though, when I started poking around on your website and getting prepped for this interview and all of that, especially, you talk about the media and how they demonize what the Railroad Commission does a lot of times. There's right there on the front of the website, there's a way to get to there's a list every month of the fines that you all hand out to the oil companies who aren't doing the right thing, or and it can be sometimes over $1 million a month that you're handing out. I mean, you guys are absolutely regulating and enforcing.
The police regulate that and rein them in and charge. But let me tell you another funny part of that. The Railroad Commission of Texas has gotten more pro-environmental awards than any other agency, I think, in the United States. In fact, what's funny with these...
You definitely don't hear that in the media.
No, and I've got a list. I've made a sheet with all those awards for decades. I mean, we were the one that strained in back after World War II, when Kilgore, East Texas, and all this, the land was being polluted. We were drying up all the oil, drilling fast as you could, drill, baby, drill. There were literally 25 feet between oil wells out there. We're the ones, the Railroad Commission of Texas, that regulated the rights, regulated the spacing, regulated cleaning up. We were the original environmental friend in oil and gas. And what's funny is when some of these green groups come before and they say, oh, y'all don't like the environment, whatever like that. I'll say, well, how many environmental awards has your organization won from the federal government? Oh, we're none. Well, we've won from state, and I go through, we've won, I think, a dozen in the past 10 years at least. And more funny than anything, I said, by the way, Joe Biden's administration probably is the least favorable to oil and gas. And if you'll look, year before last, 2022, 2022 or 2023, we won the national award from the Department of Interior for the best environmental cleanup award in the United States. And I said, has your green organization won an award from Joe Biden's Department of Interior? We have, in the state of Texas. So we won the Joe Biden Best Innovation Environmental Award to the Railroad Commission of Texas.
I think on your next podcast, you should just like line them up behind you on your YouTube, on your videos, so that you can see. You know how people do that sometimes.
We're
so
environmentally friendly, it stinks. That's why I tell you, the richer the country, the cleaner it is.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has been great. Commissioner Christian, we could sit here and talk about these issues all day, and it's been a real joy to sit here and talk to you. And I'm sure you got a million stories that maybe some are good for on air, some are good for off air, but we'll definitely have to have you on again as we're in the middle of session. I know there's a lot of stuff going on. Energy is going to be a huge issue, and despite what you say about our priorities, energy is a huge issue for Texas Public Policy Foundation. So we'd love to have you back. Thank you for being on so much.
Thank you, and thank you for what Texas Public Policy does. I mean, you're the great organization that ties the things together. So I tremendously appreciate you, but I think oil and gas should be in the top 10. Still my opinion.
All right, you've officially lobbied us, and we appreciate you. We appreciate everybody out there who watches us from week to week, who watches us, listens to the podcast on all of our various ways that you can get the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and others. And as we like to say in closing every week, in the immortal words of Sam Houston, do good and risk the consequences. We'll see you next time.